Spurs drew away at Brentford 0-0. And the question that I was sort of wrestling with was Brentford Spurs the worst game of the season so far? An XG of 0.56 versus 0.61. Spurs had to wait until the 3rd minute of stoppage time to have a meaningful shot on target. The Spurs fans in the away end weren't too entertained. They were singing boring, boring Tottenham, and the disillusionment is clear. But the flip side of this argument, Crook, is that they've taken 4 points from trips to Palace and Brentford. I mean, it might be boring to watch, but they clearly needed to tighten up at the back after the way that they'd performed last season. But the fans, they just aren't having it, are they?
No, I mean, Thomas Frank will take the positives. As you say, 2 clean sheets, 2 difficult grounds to visit. But in both cases, the football was fairly ordinary. Even in victory against Crystal Palace, there were times, particularly at the start of the second half, when Palace absolutely dominated the match but just couldn't put the ball in the back of the net. It does sound like quite a turgid affair last night as well. You mentioned those chants from the away end of boring, boring Tottenham. And I think this is just another example of the fact there's a lot of Spurs fans who aren't buying into Thomas Frank as the Tottenham manager. We heard from our own Darren Ambrose after that Palace game saying that he's in the minority of Spurs fans who actually want to give Thomas Frank more time. A lot have already made their mind up. And it's not the away fans, really, who are the issue. It's what's going on at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, where obviously 2025 was a record-breaking year in terms of the most home defeats suffered in a single calendar year. And they're back there against Sunderland at the weekend. And if they don't dominate, don't play on the front foot, then again, I think those dissenting voices will come to the fore.
I'm really interested to see how the Tottenham fans feel about this as a whole group, really, because somebody I spoke to this morning was suggesting to me, hold on a second, we're 4 points off 5th. We were in a dire situation this time last year where we couldn't stop leaking goals. We're keeping more clean sheets, especially away from home. We're actually performing quite well. The flip side of that argument is that they've got the 17th best home record in the Premier League this season. They rank 17th in terms of XG, 17th in terms of shots, and they're overperforming on those metrics. So they're 10th in terms of goals, and they're not so far back in terms of qualifying for the top 5. However, the fact is if you base your assumptions on the fact that those metrics will only hold for so long, Tottenham are more likely to slip down the table than they are to increase their position in the table on current form. If you go to Brentford and disrupt and delay, then clearly the fans are not going to have that, because Tottenham are seen as a much bigger club than Brentford. It's felt as if that they should be going and winning those particular games. But the truth is that actually Brentford is a really difficult place to go. The 4th best home record in the league, behind Arsenal, City and Aston Villa. And other teams have perished there. So was Thomas Frank actually quite right to go there to disrupt, to delay? I mean, Vicario was booked for time wasting at one point. I mean, you might be on a hiding to nothing from the supporters, but actually, was it the right tactic?
Yeah, I think I'm right in saying that Manchester City are the only team to win there this season, aren't they? And you've mentioned some of the teams that have fallen. Liverpool,
United,
Villa,
Liverpool, Chelsea
Manchester
dropped
United,
points there.
Chelsea off the top of my head, yeah. So I think it's a good point. But the trouble is there's already this narrative about Thomas Frank when it comes to the Spurs fans that we shouldn't be taking managers from Brentford. The football's rubbish. We're not playing a Tottenham way. So a 0-0 draw at Brentford is being used as a stick to beat him with, when actually I think it's probably quite a good result.
Well, Thomas Frank thought it was a good result. This is him speaking to our commentator Joe Shannon after the game.
I think it was defensively very strong away performance against a Brentford team that we know can cause a lot of problems. So we dealt with their set piece, we dealt with their direct play, we dealt with their transitions, basically only giving 7 shots away. I think that was a very strong performance. So that I'm very happy with. I think that's very, very important. I think the problem we struggled with, that I think we gave the ball away too many times. So it was difficult to really create when we are not better on the ball than we were today. So that's a big thing. So that was the reason why we didn't. That was not a top performance. So that's the bit we need to add.
Interesting. He thinks that the fluency will eventually come. It was a dull, goalless 0-0 draw last night, but he always seems to find the positive doesn't he? And one of the Tottenham fans that I know this morning said, sometimes it's a little bit annoying. Occasionally it'd be better if he just dug people out and said, we need to do better than this. That wasn't great. Has he got enough of a mean streak to be able to handle a big club like Spurs?
Well, I think he's one of the nicest guys in the Premier League. I've always had an incredible amount of time for Thomas Frank. Whenever he was in charge of a game at Brentford, and I'm sure it's the same with Spurs, before he'd speak to us in the media, he always made a point of going into the referee's room and obviously just exchanging pleasantries with them. That's quite unusual. Is he mean enough? Maybe not. Maybe you do need that ruthless streak at a top club, but it's too early to judge, isn't it? It's the 2nd of January. You just say they're not that far away from the top 5 in terms of points anyway, although league position may tell you a slightly different story. I think they've got to at least give him the season. They've got to give him at least another transfer window, because I'm not sure he was really backed as he would have wanted to be in the summer. The owners, ENIC, have said that they're going to prioritise sporting success. Therefore, you assume there will be funds to spend. Obviously, Brennan Johnson is moving on. They're going to have to replace him. So I think it's far too early for Tottenham fans to be rushing to judgment on Thomas Frank.
Yeah, there's certainly some changes as well that might well be happening in a senior level in terms of transfer negotiation. I think there's a senior sort of executive who works alongside Fabio Paratici, who is leaving at the end of this window. Paratici himself has been linked with a move to Fiorentina, although I understand he is going to be there throughout the course of this window, but I'm not entirely sure they're going to go for top name targets during the course of this period. They did try for Antoine Semenyo, but obviously his preference was to go elsewhere. Be interesting to see what the structure at Spurs is going to be after this window, because if you keep chopping and changing that sort of department that is above the manager, then it leads to an unsettled recruitment process. Well, the recruitment process hasn't been great anyway, but to have the administrator and probably the transfer negotiator all going at the same time, that's going to be very, very difficult. And for all this talk of wanting sporting success and reinvesting in the squad, if you're not going to go for top targets during this January transfer window, as I've been told they probably won't go for top targets during this January transfer window, it's not going to make much of a difference, is it, this time around?
No, not in terms of the rest of the season. I'm still sceptical. Call me a cynic. But Daniel Levy was ousted, and we were told it was because they want more silverware, they want more on-field success, they're going to release the purse strings. I'm not convinced. I still think the reason that Daniel Levy was ousted was because of his own toxic relationship with the Tottenham fans, and they think it's going to be easier to sell their shares if he's not there anymore.
Absolutely. I can understand why the Tottenham fans are a little bit disappointed with what they saw, because they don't like 0-0 draws. In fact, they've not really had that many. That was the first time in 137 Premier League games that Spurs have entertained a goalless draw, which is quite some statistic. They're still in the bottom half of the table, 12th at the moment. They are 4 points off the top 5, but they're also 5 points off Leeds United. 03717 223344. Then this is the question for the Spurs fans. Where are you right now on Thomas Frank? Does he have enough of a mean streak to manage the big entities like Tottenham Hotspur? Was Brentford Spurs the worst game of the season so far? Were you there? Did you sing boring, boring Tottenham yesterday? 81089 on the text, 03717 223344. And if they're not going to go for top targets, stellar names in the January transfer window, what does the rest of the season hold?